This is large from small. I guess large sunset from small sunset. So this is a really sort of kind of a strange design, I'd say, with a great big storm cloud kind of running through. And this was really right up my alley as far as what I'm interested in, looking for interesting sort of light phenomena. And, there's a lot to be said about this. But I think the thing that drew me to it was the fact that it has really interesting shapes, first and foremost. There's a really interesting sort of interplay of it's almost like a yin yang sort of thing is what I was thinking about, how it's got a warm, small shape, and then it kind of shifts into a cool shape in an interesting way. Savannah, there's kind of an echo going on. I think it might have to do with your...
Sorry.
That's okay.
Thanks for letting me know.
No worries. That was the thing too, is the really interesting shapes, but then also how that cloud, which is just, it's just water vapor, right? But how it's soaking up so much of the sunlight and then it's just kind of like drowning it. And so by the time you get across the length of the cloud, there's really no rich, warm sunlight on the other side. It's all very cool. And so I was trying to capture that warm to cool temperature change. And also just the really rich darkness of colors that are in there, because you don't typically think of a cloud being that dark. And you could argue it's a photo issue that is causing that. And that's probably true to some extent. But at the same time, I have seen storm clouds that are just this dark. It does happen. So you'll see as I paint this that I do go on the darker side because I am interested in kind of reproducing what's going on there. So I'm kind of taking my sweet time getting this set up. Normally I'm not that finicky with like a preliminary study like this, but I decided to be super meticulous about it. So the first portion is just going to be the drawing. And I'm really pretty true to the photo reference here. I'm a little bit taller, so its proportions are a little bit different, but there is some leeway to play with because I'm just interested in capturing like the main vibe of the photograph. And I do the smaller one because I really wanted to be sure about establishing the colors and the values before I moved into the big one. So this, I'd say it's probably like a 4-inch by 5-inch. And I don't know centimeters, what that would be in centimeters, but it's probably more than 4 by 5 centimeters. Anyway, I wanted to get it down small and then move to something big instead of kind of solving my problems on a larger paper. And the order that I do it is pretty much the same. There are a couple differences, and those are because I figured the things out beforehand. I figured them out on the small study that I just kind of jumped right in and was a little bit more bold in some of my choices. Whereas with the small one here, I am trying to figure out what's going to go where and what adjustments I need to make and such. So right now I'm just kind of mapping things out in a very broad way. And again, when it comes to drawing, it's, putting it down in a very simple, understated way, but just enough that it makes sense to me. And usually those are just divisions of shapes. And a shape represents an area of color to me, or something that I should keep in mind. And it's never much beyond that, because obviously it's going to get painted over, and it's about the painting and not the drawing. It's just mapping things out in a very broad way. And like I've said, you are drawing continually throughout the painting process. So this is just kind of getting started. And, I don't know. I guess I haven't seen too many other gouache painters. I don't know if they start with a pencil drawing or if they just jump right in and draw with the brush, but I would imagine there's lots of different ways to do it. But this is just, because I tend, when I get a brush, I am less careful with my drawing for whatever reason. So I feel like when I have a pencil, I'm a little bit more controlled, a little more careful. And then I can be a little more loose and spontaneous with the brush when it comes to painting. But I think that's probably just like a subconscious thing for whatever reason. So that is pretty much the extent of the drawing. Just giving it a look. And you'll notice I have not squeezed my paints out on the butcher tray yet. So I'm painting without phthalo blue. So I'm just using my phthalo green. So I have my titanium white and then my cad lemon. And then cadmium orange sits next to my yellow. And I've always laid out my colors in this way, going from light to dark, and then, obviously warms to cools. And I paint with a lot of paint. Oil paint or gouache. I just go through a lot of it. I don't know how people can paint thin, but good for them. It's just these really tiny little things you're just taking off like a little dab each time. I'm not that controlled. I'm just a big, clumsy painter, I guess. So yeah, the cad red is next to the cad orange, and then alizarin crimson, and then phthalo green, and then I have my ultramarine blue. And the challenge in doing this is it looks like this is a very rich, intense colored painting, and the temptation is to want to make it exactly as you see it, full of richness and color. But, you do have to downplay a lot of that in order to make the right parts really intensified. And for me, the interesting part is the lower left portion, that warm glow. That's really what I was trying to capture. So I had to downplay a lot of the cools on the right side, though they do look pretty bluish when I paint them. They are definitely understated in comparison to the oranges. So I start with a little bit of white, little cad yellow, little cad red, or cad lemon and cad orange. And this is just like my general color note for that piece on the left. And I didn't want to start it too pale. If you look at the photo reference, it looks a lot paler. I wanted to be a little bit more intense, more saturated with that color, because you can always dial it back. So I wanted to err on the side of a little too much color so that I could pull back from that if I needed to. But again, I also keep in mind that I'm comparing to the white. So the pristine blankness, whiteness of the paper, that's going to affect the way that I perceive the first color. So I want to overdo it because, eventually it's going to be covered and it's going to take on a different look. So now as I'm moving to the right for this, first stage, I'm really just establishing, it's really gradients. So it's a shift. And so I'm kind of making like a value scale or a temperature scale or a hue scale. I'm going from one color into another color into another color, which is also going from light to dark. And it's also, in some cases, varying in intensity. So, this is warming up. It's getting a little bit more intense, a little more orange. And so what I'm trying to do, what I'm seeing is from the photo reference is just that. And I mean, you could say, yeah, it's the rainfall that's catching more of that direct sunset, sort of golden sunlight. But in my mind, I just see oranger, warmer, more intense little area of color that needs to go in this spot. So I put that down and then I back off of it a little bit. So instead of that really rich, intense orange, now it's a little bit peachier, you could say. So adding a little bit of white. And that's kind of the struggle with titanium white. I don't know if you've ever painted with titanium white much, but it's a cool white. And so sometimes it's a struggle to keep things light and warm because the blueness in the white kind of alters, those warmer hues like yellow and orange. And so now is the point where I'm sort of moving into this darker area, the darker portion of the cloud. And it's just this sort of reddish violet color, reddish gray, you could argue. And the struggle with this, the other struggle was edges. And, because there's no real hard edge in terms of this cloud. And so you're going from basically an empty sky with full sunlight light into, gradual mass of this cloud. And so this is picking up, more light, or it's getting a little bit darker. And so it's, where do you put, some semblance of an edge or some differentiation to distinguish those two. And I didn't want it to be too dark, but I wanted it to be noticeable just enough. And so it's finding that right balance. Because, a hard edge can really, affect what you're trying to convey. And it might not look quite right if it's too hard edged.
Jeremy, what were you adding in that point there?
Which color? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I honestly did not even notice. So I've only touched the ultramarine, the alizarin. I haven't even touched the phthalo. So what I did initially was I mixed some of the ultramarine in with the orangish color, which got me kind of this, those are complements. So it kind of neutralizes it. And then I think I put a little bit more cad red back into it to bring it up to red violet. So the blue kind of deadened that color. And then by, reinserting some red into it, kind of bent it a little bit more towards red violet. So now I'm darkening that to get this kind of rich dark blue on the right-hand side. And so you can see that's kind of like a rainbow, how it goes from one color into the other. So it goes, sort of this yellow, orange, red, orange into like these pale sort of red violets and then into this deep dark blue. And so now I'm just painting in this approximate mass as I see it, which goes from the lower right and it's going to kind of extend diagonally about 45 degrees up to the upper left corner. And I'm just trying to break it up a little bit, because if you look at the photo reference, it's a very sort of like strong diagonal. And I didn't want anything to be, that obvious or that blatant, because it's, I'll always remember in college, I don't remember if it was an illustration class or a design class, but, the suggestion of things going down and to the right. So in Western culture, because we read from left to right, top to down, anytime we see a slope that is angled down and to the right, it leads our eye off the page, or it leads our eye off the canvas, because we tend to follow the direction of the line. And so that's always kind of stuck with me. And if you do that, it needs to be for a good reason. It needs to lead your eye someplace significant. So I always try to avoid that happening if I can. So I'm trying to like, obviously you need to include it because it's a main sort of like visual element, but I don't want it to be so blatant that it's like the thing you look at. And also if you squint too, it's really not as light as, your mind is telling you. It does sit back in that dark mass, much more so than the sky. So, you look at it and it seems like it's just as light as the sky, but squinting down and getting those values closer together, you can actually see that it's quite a bit darker. I'm also painting this whole area a little bit darker. I will bring it up in value a little bit.